Well, thanks, Antonio. Thanks to everyone who came here to see this incredible artist that we all love so much. We're going to keep it informal because this should be a conversation. So please excuse us if we're not going to be formal. And thanks, Gregory, and thanks, Jean Charles, for this little chat that we're going to have. So I think you've all seen the exhibition before the talk, right? No? Yes? Who hasn't seen it? Raise your hand. Okay, so everyone has seen the exhibition, so maybe we don't need to explain that it's a trilogy, or maybe we should. So maybe the first question is going to be to Jean Charles, who in 5 minutes has to tell us what are we seeing in this exhibition, and it is the first time that we're seeing this trilogy together. And how does fireflies fit into the idea?
Hello, everybody. Yes, the principal idea for this show at the very, very beginning, when we started to discuss with Gregory, was to show the trilogy of the last 10 years from 212 to 222 with 3 series. The first one is Cathedral of the Pines. The second one is An Eclipse of Moss. And the third is Eveningside, which is presented for the very first time because it was commissioned by Gallery d'Italia. And so it's 10 years of work, very, very important because something we are in the continuity with the works from the past, but obviously something changed in the work. With Cathedral of the Pines in 212, we can realize that something is more intimate in these works. If you remember, for those who know very well Gregory Crewdson's work, before we had big machines, big series, big cinematographic series with Beneath the Roses or Twilight, with very dark atmospheres. But with Cathedral of the Pines, something is more emotional, more sensitive, more poetic, more romantic, maybe. And so that series was really, really important. And Gregory will told about that in a few minutes. But it was at this time the time where he found back creation after 3 years without any creation. And it was really linked with his wife, Julian, who is a production manager too for many years. And this series is dedicated to Julian, and it's very, very important because there is so much love in that series, according to me, and it's obvious. An Eclipse of Moss was made in Pittsfield, where Julian lived when she was young, and Pittsfield, it's a little city 12 miles from Beckett, the city of Cathedral of the Pines. And Pittsfield was quite destroyed by unemployment and depopulation when General Electric factory closed in the 80s, because this was a huge, huge factory. And when General Electric closed, there was a lot of social devastation in that city. And probably An Eclipse of Moss is showing us the way human beings try to stay alive and try to fight against something which is bigger and powerful than them. And that's why in that series there is so many connections with Melville's novel Moby Dick. And a lot of people in the photographies have broken legs, are walking with electric chairs, with walkers, because something is not working anymore. And the last series, Eveningside, is a kind of synthesis of all of that in a in an imaginary city, a composite city, but Gregory will explain that because it's the brand new series and it's quite important in his work. And then that was the beginning of our discussions. But I was convinced that Fireflies, an older series from 1996, was really important to show in that project because it's probably the only time where Gregory Crewdson was a real photographer, alone, without any production and post-production and without any team around him, just alone with a little camera, two cameras, in fact, two different little cameras in the night during a very special period of his life, trying to capture the flight of the fireflies in the night, which is...
Sorry if I interrupt, it's just to keep it as a conversation. I think it's very nice, the idea, it's very poetic. At the end, it's about light. Everything is about light in his work, right? I mean, and this is maybe what binds everything together, no?
Oh, I would definitely say that. First of all, thank you everyone for coming, and so pleased to be speaking to both of you, and thank you to the museum and the bank for, I think, mounting just a beautiful show in a stunning space. And I'm so just so thankful. So I'll just jump in. Thank you for that really beautiful kind of overview of the bodies of work. And that, to me, makes absolute sense in terms of the kind of reading of it. I think at the core of it, though, I really believe, I consider myself a storyteller. Photographs are very different from other narrative forms. There's no beginning, there's no beginning or after, before or after. And so you just have like one frozen moment in time to tell the story. And I think all photography in general is about light, but what I hope to do in the pictures is try to tell a story using light as a kind of narrative code to create an implied story that remains open and suggestive, and I want the viewer to complete that story with their own.
Yeah, I think I was saying yesterday, I really think so. I love the still image compared to other mediums because of what you're saying, because of how open it is to others people finding their stories within the image. And your photographs are a perfect example of that moment in between moments, no? And also finding the mystery in the everyday. There's always something mysterious and incredible about your work. A question that I have for you, I read once something that Stephen Shore said that I think it was very interesting about people who had very long career, artistic career, and he said they usually fall into two different categories. There are the ones who have somehow a monolithic vision, and which is great, like the Becker, for instance, they keep doing that. Then there's people, maybe like in a certain way, Lee Friedlander, who keeps changing. Then there are people who have relatively shorter careers, but they change the medium of photographers, if you think people like Robert Frank. So, and I always ask myself, and this is also something for me, we do certain things. I mean, what is it that keeps us going? How did your drive, for instance, change?
Well, that's a really interesting, I think, my view is that every artist has one story to tell, like one central story. And that story, it comes into being as you're coming of age as an artist. Like, I think it's a very important time, like in the 20s, when you're sort of kind of just understanding the power of art. You absorb a lot of influences. You're open at that age to influence. Stuff you love, stuff you hate. That's really important too. And then once you, and then this, I think the task or the struggle is to take those influences, internalize them, and reinvent them as your own. You mentioned Stephen Shore. I wasn't conscious of it at the time, but I do believe that one of the reasons I used those nondescript cars from the 70s and 80s is because I was originally inspired by his pictures that were made during that time when he was just photographing contemporary life. But I have integrated that kind of iconography into my own work. And then you just circle around these themes over and over again. You push and you try to challenge yourself into new directions. For instance, in these pictures, it was very clear to me I wanted to make black and white with the first time with the whole production crew. And so you could push on things formally, but you still circle around those themes. Like, you can't get away from yourself as much as you try, you know. And I would argue that that's the case for every artist, one way or another. So, and then you're always trying to find, your hope is to, like, one picture or one series of pictures will answer all your questions, but it doesn't. It just leads you to continue your journey to make the next picture.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Gregory. I have to say, for those of you who don't know Gregory that much, that he's like one of the most generous artists that I ever met. Because usually, you know, artists are a lot about narcissism and ego, and they're not people who usually listen to others or spend time to teach to others. And this is also another, Stephen Shore does that too. And Gregory teaches, and he has incredible students. We were talking about one of his students that has made incredible work. So one thing that I wanted to ask you is, how does teaching inform your work as an artist, and how has it changed you as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, I see it as all one thing. You know, your job as a teacher, your job as an artist is, I don't really see a blur between them, but like the reason I teach is to keep the conversation going for myself about like the possibilities of the medium, because I think it's like always really important to like being in connection to the next generation of artists who think about things very differently. So I think it's really important because artists tend to kind of calcify, you know, as we grow older and our things become sort of, we restrict our vision. So that's just one way of trying to keep that discourse open, you know, but I feel like I do very little as a teacher. I basically come to Yale and swim in the pool.
Oh,
basically.
Come on, it's not true. You're too humble. Jean Charles, one thing I wanted to ask you, I told you I was going to ask you this. It's just, you know, the curator is this role that it's a bit, like, I don't think that everyone knows what a curator really does, you know? And I think it's worth it to explain it. What is it? What does a curator, I mean, what do you do, and how do you get inspired yourself in your work?
Probably it's very simple, maybe 2 or 3 simple things. The first one is that when you curate a show with an artist, you always do things because you love the work, never by strategy. If you do that, you probably you have lost your soul or something. Second one is that you never instrumentalize the works because you have something to say.
That's a good point.
Yeah, because I've always seen exhibitions where I can feel that the curator has something to explain, and he uses works from artists to develop his own thought. And that's the worst thing to do to a work of art or to an artist. The third thing probably is that when you curate a show, you have to tell a story. You want to tell a story to visitors, and you want to have a particular reading of the work, but very respectful with the work. And the last thing probably is the public, is the visitors, because the two main, most important things in an exhibition are the works and people who come to see them. Yes, that's very simple, I think.
Sounds very much like being an artist. Very much like being an artist.
Yeah.
Similar dynamics with the story and the audience and the vision, all of that sort of interlocking.
You know, I really like what you're saying, because again, it goes back to put yourself a step back. And, you know, it's again about not putting your ego out there and having your own agenda.
Yeah.
So I would like to stress this idea that I think our society is too much about narcissism and ego, and we should really think about that and ask ourselves more about what other people think. What do you think is the hardest conversation that art should be having right now?
So,
the hardest conversation?
Well, there are many different complicated conversations, but I'd like to just point one thread, and that is particular to photographers, because I would say that 99.9% of the percentage of the public of culture reads pictures on screens. We all have social media, we all have photography cameras on our phones, and we look at screens on images on computer screens endlessly. I don't exclude myself from that. I think it's, in a certain way, that kind of accessibility and democracy is part of what's great about photography generally. But it also is what makes it so difficult and challenging, is like to try to make a picture in the glut of all those images, thousands and thousands of images that we're all being exposed to each day, and try to make something that feels lasting, enduring, permanent, that reflects a kind of view of the world that has authorship and subjectivity. And I do think that's like a condition of being a photographer now. It's just like, how do you deal with the whole larger question of like...
I'm thinking here, what you're saying makes me think of... is it working? Yes, thank you. It makes me think of what Fred Richin always says about the problem that we need curators, that there are enormous amounts of images out there, but who's curating the web? You know, once you had a front page because you were going to the news shop and you were buying a magazine, a newspaper, you had a front page. Today, with the web, is not like that. You know, everything goes together. And if you think of how photography evolves and somehow enriches itself of new functions, like conversational photography, the problem is it all goes together, you know? So exactly, your image goes maybe next to the selfie, next to in this infinite scroll, where I feel the important thing becomes the scroll in itself and not the particular content. So that's something to think about. No, maybe you also as a curator, how do you feel about that?
Just in terms of I mean, I fully accept that most people will see my pictures in a scrawl, you know, and I understand that. That's just like, and, but also, I think it's important to always remember that there is like this, I believe, like this core, like object on a wall that has, there's a reason people still come to museums and still travel to see the thing itself, which is so important because it is different than how we experience pictures generally. So I think there's still such an important aspect to, I mean, why do we all come to see art? It's to feel connected to something larger, you know, and to feel like some sense of hope and possibility and meaning, you know.
Yes.
We're all searching for meaning. I think that's what my pictures are about at the core of it. Is this, obviously there's like this kind of underlining sadness and anxiety and some sense of dislocation, but I think hope is also important, transcendence, and that often I think comes from beauty, it comes from light, it comes from, so if it was just complete darkness, I don't think that would be so interesting. You know, to me, I'm always looking for oppositions between light and darkness, between like beauty and sadness, between, you know, there's so many different kind of oppositional themes that I think I'm drawn to as an artist.
Thank you. Yeah, that is absolutely true for your photographs. And I mean, there are references in your work, and this is maybe a question that Jean Charles would like to answer, and you can both answer. You're referencing many different things, as you said, you know. It could be cinema, it could be paintings, poetry. I see poetry there too. So maybe you can tell us about what influenced you the most, or like, for instance, if there's been an author in particular that somehow shaped your vision. And
do you want to start with that?
Yeah, obviously there are a lot of connections and references to the past. And you told, and you were totally right yesterday, that when you are a creator, you are always you have like a tree. You have something in the ground coming from the past, connected with painting history, cinema history, literature, and what you want. And then you are doing something, and after you, other people in the future will be connected to you. It's yes, a communication from the past to the future, and obviously for you, Gregory, but it has been written a lot of time. The cinema influence with Hitchcock, with Antonioni, with David Lynch, with Todd Haynes, with P.T. Anderson, and other directors. But with painting too. Very often we talk about Hopper, but it's not the only reference, because if I look in the past, I can find connections with Italian primitives or Flemish painting too, with the kind of composition, very precise compositions you have. I can find references with Samuel van Hoogstraten, for example, with the corridor, the painting of the corridor we can see in the Louvre Museum. There is so many examples with Walter Sickert, with a lot of painters. And I'm not sure that those references are very conscious.
Yeah, I agree.
But
that's what he was saying before, about interjecting somehow, like the short
exactly.
Images, then it's just part of your
background,
and it comes out.
Yeah, it's for me a very organic process. It's not like I'm thinking about other artists or references when I'm making pictures. Like for us, it's like I'm just trying to make the most beautiful and mysterious picture I can. And you know, also trying, it's a math equation sometimes with them, just trying to like make the exact right form and the light and the relationship of the focus and all. But you're working from a backlog of images that exist within your, in your own iconography, because that's something that's also really important, that all artists create an iconography. It becomes a part of a language that is indebted to other artists. And for me, it's a wide range of like photographers and filmmakers and writers. I've absorbed certain things from all of them. And then you just try to, again, make it your own. You know, when I look through the show, there are a lot of motifs that I'm not even that conscious of when making the picture, but like certain kinds of cars, certain kinds of landscapes, the costuming, all of that I do over and over again, because it's like how I know to make a picture. And so when I look through the three bodies of work, for me, it's kind of moving in a certain way because I see that kind of being shaped. Yeah. Because it's not, it's something that's organic. So going through the different bodies of work, each body of work sort of prepares you for the next body of work. So that's all, it's like part of the engine of the work in a certain sense.
You know, it's important what you're saying, and one thing that I always tell when I get to speak to young students, to young artists, is you need to study, you need to know what happened, but because that opens your brain, and as you said, it becomes something that is inside of you and sorts of melts together and then produces new things, but yes, because you know what happened in the past, what happened in different cultures. And, you know, the other thing I was thinking is the pace at which everything goes. Now, I don't know if it's because I'm old, but sometimes I'm thinking, is there time today for something to become iconic, and maybe how much time does it need to pass for something to become iconic? But is anything going to become iconic? I don't know, but this is what we're living today. What is your point of view on this?
This is really interesting you say this, because I really feel like we live in a very accelerated culture where, like, you can see it all the time in like music and movies, where there's this like need to, like, you know, you could see like a musician or going partially because of the internet, like going from completely unknown to completely famous to being a has-been within a month, you know, yeah, or
like millions of, like,
yes,
and I don't even know who they are, and I feel like, where am I? I mean, where do I
and like the pressure, or like the box office of one weekend defines a movie, or like people binging full series in one day after people have worked years to make it. Yeah. So it's like we do live in an accelerated, instantaneous culture where we cycle through things so quickly. And again, that's like, I think part of the responsibility of art is to try to slow it down somewhat. And one thing I love about photography is that it is frozen in time, and that it almost, like, as a medium, kind of rejects that notion of acceleration in a certain way, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, but
absolutely.
It's part of the culture.
It's more meditative. It's like, of course, we can see it in the scroll, but then it's not like moving images. Exactly. You can just stay in front of an image and fantasize and see new details and new things. And no? What is your point of view on the speed and the iconicity?
Yeah, don't forget that artists need time.
Yes.
The thinking needs time, and maybe we need 20 or 30 years to become adults. How many years to elaborate not a work but an œuvre? Yes. It's a whole life, and we are living, as you know, in a very a quick world with a great speed, and the art market is very responsible for that too.
Yes.
And we need to give time to artists to think, not to do, but to think and then to do. And when you were speaking about the iconic question, I love this word, because when something becomes iconic, probably it means that the artist achieved to create a world, his own world.
Yes. Yes.
And very often the name of the artist is becoming an adjective. Like we say.
You know, I think, sorry if I interrupt you, but I feel, I don't know, we can discuss, that something becomes iconic when you have time, and that something becomes the representation of a certain period in time, and you sort of understand it afterwards. You know, I don't know if I make sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know, you think non-golden, and non-golden represents that particular time that happened, or Tillmans, or I don't know, Gursky, Sherman, somehow all these people that stayed and are in our collective memory, big artists, they also represent a particular time in society, no? And this is, maybe you recognize it afterwards.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think for an art, not to overgeneralize, but I think, I always think there's a kind of three kind of tensions that go into producing art. Again, not conscious, but like something that I think is very evident. One is the tradition and history of the medium. Every artist who makes a picture is referencing previous pictures. It's just how it works, you know. Then there's your own internal story, which we all have, our own fears and desires, and our obsessions. And then there's the moment, and I think that's so. And how does the pictures sort of connect to the larger world? How is it relevant to something outside of ourselves?
Yeah.
So I think, but it's a complicated, again, it's like a bit of a calculus, kind of a math problem. It's like, it has to be a perfect balance of all those things, you know? So that's something I just generally look for.
I agree.
In art in general.
You have in Italy a wonderful philosopher, Giorgio Agamben, who wrote this little book, fantastic. The name, I don't know the name, but the name in English probably is What is Contemporary? Yeah. And is maybe 20 or 40 pages. And it just explains one very simple thing. To be contemporary, you don't need to be up to date and to be with the fashion. The contemporary, probably, according to him, is the guy, the artist or the creator, who makes a step behind and turns back and look at the past and is connected to something which is behind him. Because if you want to be always in fashion, you always one step out of the fashion, because the fashion is always changing.
Thank you, Jean Charles. Listen, I don't want it to be just a conversation between us. I would like to leave some space for our public here, because they have the chance to maybe ask some questions to Gregory and Jean Charles. So I want to thank you, first of all, for this conversation. And I would like to open it to anyone who has clever questions.
While we're waiting for that, I do want to make a shout out to all the people here who worked on very closely with the pictures. Of course, Julianne and Rick Sands, my very long time director of photography, and his great crew, and Harper, who made this beautiful behind the scenes video that I hope everyone gets a chance to see, of the making of Eveningside, and its beautiful score by James Murphy of LCD Sound System. So beautiful, and for us very moving. And so I just want to shout out to all these just great collaborators.
Just to make you feel at ease, I remember once in Arles, who was it? I think it was Kudelka, and I love him to death. He's like one of the persons I love the most. And he was having a talk in the theater, and then there was the time for the questions from the public. And if he didn't like the question, he would say, "This question is stupid, I don't answer, thank you."
Oh.
So now it's your turn. If you have questions, that we're here.
I'll try to keep that standard.
But we're nicer. Sort of. They are. I'm not.
There's a question.
Okay.
Hello. Yes, my question is about the theme of being iconic, especially at the beginning of a research path. You sometimes feel how can I be iconic instead of how can I be myself? So maybe the question is, how can you discover yourself through researching? And
I mean, I think every artist has that struggle. It's like, who am I, and how do I make work that makes some kind of sense? And I think the driving force there is I think all of us are inspired to make art to try to make sense of the world. Because like, for all of us, the world is chaotic and sometimes unknowable, and it's a very severe place for very different reasons. So like, we want, as I think humans, to make order, you know, and I think art is one way of like trying to make sense for yourself of the world that you exist in and your relationship to it.
Thank you. I hope he answered.
Do you want to answer that?
Maybe you two would like to
Who, me?
give your point of view.
Well, you know, thank you. I think, as Gregory said, is the thing that everyone asks himself, and something, you know, I help a lot of young photographers and young artists, and I try to push them to really be themselves. And as he said, maybe this is something you discover more when you grow, who you really are. And at a certain point, and this happens even with friendships, with everything, certain point it's like no bullshit. You know what you want. You're not going to spend time with people you don't like. You're not, I mean, you remove all the unnecessary things. And I feel it's something that you should be doing also as an artist to begin with, not rush into it. Don't think you're going to know it immediately. Might take years of trying, of going out there and photographing and doing things, and little by little, and really try as much as you can as not emulate others. Like I have an example to give about fashion photography. In the past 10 years, let's say, what was going what was happening was that most of fashion photography was leaning towards documentary photography, which is it's great, a lot of incredible artists. But then I felt a lot of young artists felt the pressure to go in that direction. And then you had someone like Rafael Pavarotti, who went in a completely different direction because what's his call. And he followed his call and is now like the one who works the most. So ask yourself, how is that? You know, so yeah, it might take time, but you have to, I always say, you have to believe in yourself. You have to find your own call and go for it. And don't rush it, because it takes time sometimes, you know? That's my point of view. Yes, please.
Color, because in color you can focus the attention of the people on some detail, or broaden the attention of the people without coloring some details. So I would like to know how in black and white you can do it.
Yeah, for me that was like a real challenge, because I think more instinctively know how to photograph in color and have done most of my work in color. So I had never worked with our team photographing in black and white. And because of that, it was kind of scary to me. It was, but I knew because it was scary that I had to do it, because I knew that I would learn something in the process. And we talked very in advance a lot about like the look of the pictures, how like the monochromatic world would be described. We did tests, and I knew that I wanted like a real kind of quiet sensibility in the light, a lot of practicals, a lot of fluorescent tubes. I wanted to see different light sources in the pictures. And we talked a lot about like outfits, how they would read, and we did a lot of tests about like how they would read in black and white. And it was all about like, and in the end, it was just like such a pleasure, because there's so many things you didn't have to think about in terms of like color temperature. And there's a way black and white is just kind of abstracting in a certain way. It kind of, it creates a more singular palette. And then the last thing I'll just say is that I love the whole history of the medium, the whole history of documentary photography, like Walker Evans and Diane Arbus. So I want to make reference to those pivotal figures, and then film noir. It's really a love letter to all those influences, and I wanted to make work that referenced all that, but what brought it to a more kind of contemporary place in terms of the look and the description of the pictures. It's also why they're kind of intimate, like smaller than other bodies of work. I wanted that reference as well.
So beautiful, your black and whites. Also Sanctuary, I loved a lot.
Yes.
No subject, but
Yes.
yeah.
It's done here.
Yeah, great. In Italy, in Cinecittà, yes. Other questions? Yes?
Some of the older pieces, I have a very close friend who has collected some of your pieces, and they all seem to evoke that you're in Oklahoma or in the Ozarks, and all of the characters that I remember seeing, I'm not familiar with all of your work, are white. And I don't remember ever seeing an African American in any of the pieces. And they're all very actually beautiful people, even though they look like simple people that were in a Walker Evans 1930s photograph?
They were all made in like one series of towns, and everyone in the pictures were people who were like in the area, who like from the various townships. But I do want the pictures to feel like they're outside of town. You know, they're kind of like sort of connected somewhere, but also nowhere in some way. And I just make the pictures the way I make them. You know, that's the sort of I respond to like different subjects that like we literally see on the street or something, and create the best picture I can.
Thank you. Maybe yes.
Hi. I would like to ask, how do you know when a series is complete?
Well, we tend to work in like a film, like a short, because it's so complicated to like make a series of pictures. You know, you can imagine the production, like location scouting, and then like putting the crews together. So it's a very long process. So we work for like 5 or 6 weeks, usually hoping to do like 20 different pictures. And then in this case, we shot, I think, for like 8 weeks, and we made 20 pictures during that 8 weeks, like very much like a movie in terms of scheduling and everything. So it felt complete when we finished it, but sometimes like Beneath the Roses took like 8 years to make. There were like 8 different productions. So each series has its own time, size, image.
Well, I think we answered a lot of questions, and so I really want to thank all of you who came here to listen to us, especially to Gregory and Jean Charles, and it was an honor for me to moderate you.
Oh, my pleasure.
And thanks again to Antonio Carloni for having me here today, and to Galleria d'Italia, and especially to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good? Yeah, great, perfect. How was that? Good? Yes.
You were confident?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Alessia.